You would think by now that we would have relationships figured out in midlife, but the truth is, there's always more to learn, especially when it comes to emotional connection, intimacy, and voicing our needs. Hi, I'm Kim, and this is episode 95 of the Emotional Needs Podcast. And I'm really excited to introduce to you today's guest, relationship expert and author Bob Grant. Bob dives into the patterns, struggles, and breakthroughs that women experience in love, partnerships, especially in midlife. And in this episode, we explore the connection between relationships and emotional eating, why having a strong relationship with yourself is key. We talk about common struggles for women over 40 in relationships. You might be able to relate to these. People pleasing, boundaries, and learning to express your needs. How men and women think differently in relationships. That's my favorite, and why men may pull away, and how dating in midlife is unique. Power dynamics in relationships and what they mean for you, whether you're single, dating, or in a long term relationship. This episode is full of insights to help you navigate love and connection in midlife. If you enjoy this conversation, share it with a friend who needs to hear it. Don't forget to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. I would love to hear from you. What's been your biggest relationship challenge in midlife? Drop a comment and let's chat. As always, I appreciate you and thank you so much for listening. Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for coming on the Emotional Eats podcast.
Hi, Kim. It's nice to meet you. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad. We had such a great offline conversation the other day. Gave me so many ideas on things I want to ask you because we have a lot of the same age group of women in common, and relationships are big. We're going through a lot of transitions. But before we even get to all the things that you're going to share with us today, I want to know a little bit about your background and how did you end up shifting into coaching women in relationships?
Well, thanks. I started out as a therapist, like straight out of graduate school, and worked in the hospital and really loved all that experience. And I had one client that was a hairstylist, and she dated a lot, but just couldn't find someone that wanted to marry her or wasn't sure if she was picking the right guys. And she liked some of the suggestions I gave her. And because of what she did, everyone that came into her chair heard about Bob. And she would pass out cards. It was wonderful. And so I'd have these people come in. I had no idea where they came from, and it ended up being through her. And I just really liked as the women would come in, they were interested in growing, and they were willing to try new things and take a look at stuff. And as they did that, and I started seeing the results, from whether marriages got better or whether they were single, and finally they seemed to find some guy they really clicked with and that it worked out well, is that I just really enjoyed that and then someone suggested I write a book, then wrote a book, and I've just stayed with this, and it's really fulfilling for me, and that's why I was excited when I saw what you do, especially the title of your podcast. I thought, oh my gosh, she'd be perfect. So that's why I'd reached out to you.
Well, I'm so glad you did. And the conversation, we felt like we really overlapped. And I'm really excited to talk about relationships can even create some of the things that cause us to cope in other ways. And I'm wondering what kind of women are coming in because in the women that I work with over 40, we've got women who've been married a long time, we've got women who are divorced, we've got people blending families. We've got so many different people coming in. What are you seeing? Who's coming to you for the advice?
So most of the women I talk with, they either have a career or they've been pretty productive in a lot of areas. And what's frustrating is that in the area of relationships, they struggle. And as we sort of do a deep dive with them, it's not there's relationships, their boyfriend or husband, but also the relationships with how they treat themselves. And as much as they, initially may come in for, can you tell me three things to say that might get my boyfriend's attention? And I'll say, I can do that. I said, but that's a short lived thing, like going on a crash diet. I mean, short term may work out. And most all the time, we end up talking about emotional things. What do you do when you're scared? What do you do when you're angry? That kind of. And then there's the walls they put up that almost all have. And then how do we address those walls? Because there's a number of ways I found that, I mean, men or women can actually hide behind them. Sometimes when I get overwhelmed, I'll play video games too much. And I know when I do that, that's my warning sign. Okay, Bob, what are you avoiding? What do we can get back to? It can be food, as we talked about. It can be sleep. And so we end up addressing those things because those things are usually what get in the way of the relationship they want. It's rarely as simple as just, oh, I just need to say the right thing. Well, he's probably picking up on some of those walls that you have that you may or may not be aware of.
I really love this. I want to go back to what you said, the relationship to themselves, because as you and I talked about emotional eating before, it's not the relationship with food all the time. It is the relationship to themselves and how they feel about themselves. So I'm curious, all these walls and these layers that you are getting through, how far back are you going into their lives to figure out, are you finding out that this is coming from a particular place? Is it something that may be from their past?
So that's a good question. I like the idea, as opposed to what I was taught to do, which was to do a full history and go through everything. I like to find out what's going on right now because that's where someone's attention's focused. And then ask them, does this feel familiar? Because a lot of them know, I wish I hadn't said that, or I don't know what I was thinking. And their reaction is to be harsh with themselves. And that becomes the problems because when you're doing that, now you're going to punish, now you're going to blame. And what's familiar about this? And usually there's going to be past relationships. And if we get to know each other, maybe it's mom or dad. We're not so much looking for a villain as much as we're looking for how did you learn to cope with that? Food is a common one. Shopping sometimes can be. And I don't even necessarily say we have to, label it as addictive or have some harsh label to it as much as what you're doing to make yourself feel good short term is having this effect. And if we can go back and kind of find out, where this came from, that gives us some idea as to why it's so powerful. So generally, I go as far back as I have to. And if they get the insight, just from something that's happened the last couple of years, okay. I mean, that's good enough for me.
Oh, and I love how you are showing the balance between what you're doing and really what you used to in more of a traditional therapy model. So it's really interesting. I'm
Mhm.
curious too, because you mentioned women saying things that they think their partner wants to hear. And I deal with a lot of women who are very much people pleasing, which is not at all taking care of themselves. They're taking care of everyone else. How are you helping women who feel that need to be the perfect girlfriend and do all these things, but they're not taking care of their own needs?
Yeah, I can tell you've worked with a lot because I hear some of the same stuff as you're talking about. I like the idea of normalizing things as much as possible. So I find that when someone's struggling with something, not always, most of the time, they're taking something they're good at, but they're overusing it. So I always tell folks under stress, if I'm a giver, I'm likely going to become a doormat. If I'm a take charge person under stress, I might become a tyrant. Again, that's for short periods because it's hard for me to give up what I'm good at. If I'm take charge, what's wrong with taking charge? We'd say nothing, but you're overusing it. What's wrong with giving? I hear that one a lot. What's wrong with me? I'm just a kind person. Yes, but sometimes you're kind when you need to say no. And that I find that spills over even with habits too. Like I mentioned video games. What's wrong with the video game? Nothing's wrong with that. But if I'm using it to avoid or I'm using it just to numb out, that becomes something worse over time because I usually don't notice it's a problem until it hurts really bad. Well, now we have to dig out of a hole versus being proactive, as you said, taking care of yourself. And part of that's knowing, what I'm using to numb out, be aware, and, when I'm actually setting a healthy boundary and being authentic with who I am.
Oh, that's so good. So let's talk about men and women because we know we think differently, but I don't think we really understand the difference between the two. So, how are men thinking versus women, especially in relationships?
See, here's the most glaring one I found, and it was discovered by accident, is what men, and I still have a hard time with this, don't understand is that women think about something constantly. I'm asking you because I get that reaction, what you're doing,
Yes.
like, of course, that's obvious. And men, we rarely think about something. So we have what I call a nothing box. And it's a place where we go, and
Right.
most of the time we're really not thinking about anything. So when she says, "What are you thinking about?" and he says, "Nothing," most of the time that's true. Oh, you must be thinking about something. No, I'm really not. Because when we engage, it's like an all or nothing thing.
Mhm.
So, like, if my focus is on something, that's 95%. Men don't do good multitasking in relationships. We're going to miss clues and cues that our partner gives us unless there's a real emotional connection. So, well, I was going to do the research, I forgot, but there was one study they did. They showed when the couple felt really emotionally connected with each other, she would do hints or she would have a look on her face and he'd pick up on it. If they weren't, she could hint, she could clear her throat, she could roll her eyes, and he just was, because that emotional connection helps us pick up on what our partner's feeling. That may take a little bit of time, but that's probably the most glaring one I found. And then from that, you have the expectations of, he should know, because my girlfriend's what? I mean, I'm being obvious. Can't he feel what I'm doing? I mean, maybe, maybe not. I don't know who's at blame, but I know it's not working if we're doing the should, must, ought to. And that also gets men in trouble. I get this as a guy. When someone's in stress, rather than a guy will say, "You'll be fine." That's a compliment to us guys. That drives women crazy. They just
Relax.
relax. Yes,
That's my
relax.
favorite
That's a good one.
one.
Relax over here.
Calm
And I get that.
down.
Calm down. If a guy says that to me, it means calm down. You're in control. You've got this. That's not how it comes across. So some of it's just some basic differences, I think, between the sexes. And some of it is a willingness to allow the other person to influence me. And that's the part we have more control over.
Yes, I love that. So it's funny when you said that, when you ask a man what they're thinking and they say nothing, they mean it. When a woman says, after being asked, "What are you thinking?" and they say nothing, that's
Hmm.
really kind of passive
Hmm.
aggressive.
That's,
Nothing.
that's, I've told men, I'm like, just go sit by her. She says she's upset. Exactly. Just go sit by her. She's not, just go sit by her.
Yep.
I'm just trying to give them something to
Just be
do. Stop
there.
thinking. Just sit there. Just sit there and wait. You don't have
That
to say
is
anything.
so true. So, as far as vulnerability, how important is it for women to really be vulnerable in their relationships?
And I think that's a great point because for us men, your vulnerability as a woman is really the only way I'm going to be able to access your heart. Now, some of that's on me. I've got to make sure you feel safe. Don't do dumb things. Don't be selfish all the time. I mean, basic stuff. But that vulnerability, I usually use this when it comes to a compliment. And there was one couple I know that my husband asked me, he said, "Can you please explain this to her?" I didn't like the way he said that, but okay, we'll try. And when he did something she liked, she says, "I'm just more of a quiet person. I like to keep it inside." Awesome. Great. Now, when he does something you don't like, do you keep it inside? She's like, "No." No. Because he would get the energy and the feedback when he did something. And she should have been upset, but when he did something that she really liked, he couldn't tell. And what happens with men after a while is we stop trying. I'm not saying we should, but some guys give up easier than others. Because if I can get a woman to have the same intensity when she likes something, which means you share it, versus when he messes up, then he'll learn. He'll get an idea of what works for you. It's the intensity of it. The more I can get it to match, the easier it is for him to learn your preferences. And that's really what we want is for him to learn you uniquely, the things you like versus just every woman.
It also sounds like it's a great time to give gratitude because who doesn't like to hear and get reinforced with a thank you for doing that
Mm-hmm.
instead of just only hearing the negative? And I think that's something when you get close to someone, you've been with someone for a while, you have to remind yourself to do because we get really comfortable in relationships. And I'm laughing too when you were talking about he should know what I'm thinking. The idea of ESP, having ESP in a relationship, for some reason we've been trained to think that that's, something that we should know. And I'm curious along these lines, power in a relationship. What are your thoughts on the power of men, women, equal, one a little more? How does that work?
It's complicated, isn't it? So I think in any relationship, especially a marriage or a partnership, a big part of it is how do we share power? And there's different ways. Everyone loves to quote John Gottman, the research. Everybody just loves him. And one of his points is that for men, it's how willing are you as a man to share power with a woman? Specifically, will you allow her to influence you? Now, someone got a hold of that and was like, husbands, just do what your wives say. And that's not what he meant. It goes to the woman too, also to learn, okay, what works with him, what doesn't. You know, some men don't mind it if you talk a certain way. Some are like, hey, that's disrespectful. And it's a little bit of both. And so as a man, is I can do stuff on my own and I can go ahead and act like I'm single or independent, but she's going to wonder, why do you need me? She's not going to feel, as important. And that kind of joined together is the more I can involve her in a choice, the more I can consider her opinion, the more I can give in when I know I'm wrong. I mean, I tell men, I'm like, if you're wrong, just say you're wrong. Don't pick your fights. That's going to be awful. And as each one sees that the other will allow them to influence, then the need for power starts to go down. And you'll find a lot of that butting heads because I feel like I have to stand up for myself or protect my interests. And specifically, I don't think you're listening to me.
I like that you just said that because I think there's an element that I hear from women. They want to be seen and heard, and so do their partners, just wanting to be heard, not having to have a right or wrong. And let's go back to the apologizing also and saying sorry if something happens. Do you have to help partners in relationships learn to actually be able to say, I'm sorry?
Yes, and I had to think about that because most of the time with the apology is the person is stuck on what the other one did. I'm mad because she blank. I got that. I understand she did that. But if we don't start with where we're at, all this, here's the reason why it's become circular. So one of the main things with helping them is great couples argue. They have disagreements, but they keep it at like an 8 or below. They don't give it above 8. No matter what happens, I can be mad at you, but you're my partner. You're my wife, you're my husband. And part of that is once it starts to get close to that, they focus more on the safety of it than the content. So right now, I disagree with you. I'm so mad. I could spit nails. God help me, but I love you. I mean, some version of that to keep it at a level so that I'm reinforcing we're a team. Okay, we're going to work this out. One thing I've done with them is have an exercise someone taught me, and they would talk to each other for like a minute each. So I talk for a minute, you just listen, no comment, no eye rolling, no nothing. Then you talk for a minute. And I've had when they go back and forth, what usually comes up is their pattern emerges. So maybe someone would interrupt. This doesn't allow that. Maybe someone would get up when they're upset. No, no, you promised to do this. They can't do that. And it forces. But they get to see what it's like to stick with a conversation without worrying about being either dominated or ignored or whatever the fear is. And sometimes they're just not good at the process. They're just so worried about losing or being taken advantage of. So anything fun we can do like that to help them so that power isn't such a dirty word, that it's something we can use or not use and it can fall off when necessary.
Wow. I like that exercise because it really does help you figure out what you would normally do because we do go into fight or flight mode and have different things that we do to cope in a relationship. And that leads me also to thinking about when women come in and talk to me about their relationships, I'm hearing something with some of them, many of them, where the conversation is almost them wishing that their partner was doing things their way or the way they would do them, or, and I'm going to throw this word in here and you can tell me if I'm off base using it, but they're in their world seeing me for a reason because they're trying to control their body, control their food, control everything. And it's leading even into trying to, with
Mhm.
their world in chaos, control their partner. And how do you help women who really just want to control the situation and control their partner so much?
So I'd be interested in what you think since you see this also on your end. Is when I feel like someone's out of control, I mean, they're wanting to control, it's because they feel out of control. And so then I try to walk with them toward that and I use a picture of like a little girl because I think every woman instinctively knows how to treat a little girl. I said, if she was feeling out of control or scared, I really doubt that you would tell her to get over it, toughen up, don't be so weak. I think you probably just maybe you sit them down next to you. You don't necessarily have a magic answer, but you would allow them to feel whatever they felt because it doesn't change what you think of them. I mean, I think women are just good at this when it's someone else. I said, but then you take your heart and you have a totally different set of rules. Can't be weak, can't complain, can't whatever. And I'm like, okay, your heart's wondering, when do I get my turn? So if it feels out of control, sorry. So if it feels out of control, then what I'm asking is, what's feeling out of control? I mean, there's a reason they're feeling that. Does it just feel like there's an argument that never ends? And I want to be something practical because I've found is that our emotions tend to be faster than our thinking. And so we may not always get it right, but it's picking up on something. There's a real problem behind that emotion. And then can we walk toward that problem as opposed to just making that feeling go away? If my hand was on fire, it's supposed to hurt. That's a good thing. If I'm hungry, I'm supposed to eat. I mean, it's no good to bury the feeling. And so that's what I'm looking for with them as to why, what's going on with it first, and then can we solve the problem? And then let's see what's going on with either anxiety or what maybe feels out of control.
Yes, I am seeing the same thing that when things are out of control, that's when they buckle down on everything else and try to track and control other people and have other people live up to their expectations. And it's really so much deeper than just the relationship or just the relationship with food. So I think that's great. And I love the little girl conversation because we would not tell our best friend and we would not tell a little girl what we say to ourselves as far as expecting to deal with everything. So what are some of the things that your clients are when they're struggling in their relationship? Let's talk about dating first, because I have a lot of women who have gotten divorced. A couple of them are widows, and they're looking at dating and they're not connecting people, they're not staying with someone or someone they're getting broken up with a lot. Granted, we know some of this is always for a reason because it's a fit or not a fit, but what are you seeing with women that is causing this to happen if you feel like maybe there's something they can be working on? And I'm saying to everybody out there, you're awesome, you're amazing. We all have things to work on.
Mm-hmm.
But in the relationship realm and communicating with someone of the opposite sex or same, if they decide to date, either way, what's happening out there?
And this is what appealed to me when I reached out to you, is because I think what they do with food and other things, it's they focus more on intensity than they focus on necessarily who's going to be a good fit. So not to segue, but to me it ties in. There are times I've always had a fast metabolism, so I could eat whatever. But going back as I got older, realizing there are times I would just binge out on carbs or binge out on something because it changed my mood immediately. I can get away with that when I was younger. Well, now I'm like, that doesn't feel good like it kind of did growing up. But they'll do the same thing with dating apps or something because the fear is I've either been in a bad relationship or bad marriage, and I don't want that again. So if I feel bored or uninterested, this must not be a good fit. I'm like, well, maybe it's not a good fit, maybe not. But when we base stuff simply on intensity, I'm not saying that's not fun. That's a poor predictor because what our brain's doing is, he smiles, he's got great teeth, so therefore he's kind. He may be kind, he may just have great teeth. We don't know. And I don't know what he's like when he's angry. One of the things I'll do with them is we take this time to figure out what are your non-negotiables. And I think they're written at everyone's heart as opposed to me telling them. And it may take a little time to find them, but those are things that are unique to you, whether it's kind, one person picked tall. I found it doesn't matter the things they pick, it's the number. So picky is when I have 8 things I have to have. No man's going to have 8 things, or woman's going to have 8 things. But we can get it down to 3 or so, because most married couples I talk with that really love their marriage, they really say there's like a couple of things, but no one would believe me if I said just two. So it's fine. So three. If they have those three things, then let's date that way. But because those things are going to take a little time to discover. Like if he's, kind, I mean, like above average things. If he's kind, well, you're not going to know that on the first date. If he's really patient, you're not going to know that either. But you will know it when he gets upset and how he treats the waiter or waitress. You will know it when, whatever reason, your kid's sick and you have to cancel last minute. That you can ask him and he'll tell you, I'm so kind. But the time will actually show that. And if I can get them to focus more on that, then it gets rid of the impatient guys, the guys that just want, good time and nothing else. They won't tolerate that at all. And the quality guys are the ones that are going to remain.
Wow. I got divorced in the early 2000s and was single in my late 30s, early 40s for probably 6 or 7 years. And it reminds me that when I dated a few people, the app thing was not as big. That's how old I am.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me I made a list. I actually did make a list after
Mm-hmm.
going through the ones that I didn't love. I made a list, and it's really interesting because when you do have some non-negotiables, it may be only two or three non-negotiables. The rest are really nice to have. I find that really interesting. In dating, what's different about dating? I could write a book on this, but what's different
Mm-hmm.
about dating in your 40s and 50s versus dating in your 20s?
So I don't have a lot of clients in their 20s. And part of the reason is, and I never have, and I'm generalizing, I've been in my 20s, so no judgment on this. But in my 20s, I still have ideally a lot of years ahead of me, and I feel like I have time so I can experiment and try stuff. And I feel like I have a lot more options. And I, depending on the person, haven't been hurt as much or haven't been through as many relationships. Once I start getting the 40s and 50s, some of the idealistic stuff dies down. And I mean, some of the ideal stuff is fun. But if I'm a man in my 40s and 50s, I have a different view of women that I did earlier because I know they're not perfect. I know they have certain things, and I know all that, and yet I still want to be with them. Again, not every guy in their 20s, but a lot of guys in their 20s, it's how intense do I feel? How much fun is she? Which is great, but what you're going to care more about, does she support you when you got laid off? And instead of complaining all the time, does she know how to push and nudge? Things I don't think you really think about as much in your 20s. And also, I find especially in the 40s, is a lot of the women I talk with, the fear is I feel like I've got one more shot at love, or at least I think, and I don't want to mess this up because I don't, not that they did before. I don't have 20 years to waste or 20 years to like start again. I don't want to do that again. I've been through it once. And because they're really cautious about, how do I know? Because I know what it's like. I picked poorly before, at least I feel like I did. And I want to pick right this time. And I'm terrified of making a mistake, but I'm also terrifying of never finding someone again. So it's sort of a catch 22.
It is. And it is different. I think everything you mentioned is so true. And I think so many women think their man picking button is broken at this point. So
So I've
I
actually had several use that phrase. That's what's funny.
Yes.
Mhm.
What I'm curious about too is so let's say you're working with someone who is in a relationship and they want to learn to pick better. Have you ever had to help coach someone who's really in something dysfunctional that really is not a good fit and they're having a hard time getting themselves out of it?
Yes, I do get those. And I know when it starts, the idea is to how can we save this? And I'm all for that. But as it becomes more and more obvious, the thing I usually ask them is at some point, if this doesn't change, can you live with this? And usually the response I get is, I don't want to change anybody. And I'll say, I'm not saying that's your job to change someone, but if he's drinking and driving, that needs to change. Now, I can't make him and you can't either, but I don't know that you want to accept that. If he's the obvious stuff, if he's physically abusive or, unfaithful, I don't know that you want to, that's obvious, tolerate that either. But is this something you can live with if it doesn't change? Because continuing the relationship, anticipating it's just going to change is a recipe for disaster. Now we're dating for potential. And I tell men and women this. I'm like, don't count on that because they're going to get more comfortable the longer you live with them or the longer you're with them. And if you don't like this now, time is, I tell folks, time, marriage especially magnifies the relationship or magnifies the person. So what you like, you tend to get more of, and what you don't like, you tend to get more of. So can you accept this? And usually at that point, when they're in it, then it's how do we set a boundary or a limit? What are you willing to accept? What are you willing to, reject, whatever it takes? But what we don't want is to tolerate because tolerating is where we get resentful and the partner picks up on it. And I've seen folks tolerate for 10, 15, 20 years, and it always ends out, poorly. So I'm trying to push them or get them to one of those two categories to accept or reject something.
Yeah, that's really good. And I like your point about when you meet someone, the things that you find endearing. I always joke with my current husband about this. The things that we thought were so funny and endearing, sometimes they'll get on your nerves. It's really good to look back and be like, hey, this
Mm-hmm.
is why I thought this guy was so great and funny. And but those things that are a little bit annoying, yeah, it's just going to keep going. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we all have flaws. We really do. But I love how you say with that, we all, we tolerating is not necessary for some of those things that are really hardcore. So I appreciate that. I'm curious too, what do you think is the reason for women and men who they get into a deeper relationship? Why are men pulling away? What are some of the reasons for them kind of pulling back from the relationship?
That's a good question. Because I think it depends on the man. So for some men, if we look at their pattern, they only let women get so close. So some of it is that. And sometimes you'll notice that in the first few dates. Sometimes a man, there's just he doesn't do well with certain ways of either being confronted or discussing stuff. Going back to the nothing box. If I need time to like detach and think about a problem, I may not be good, and most men I don't think are good at processing as we're talking. Because like for men, if there's a discussion, there's your way or my way, let's reach an agreement. If not, then it's may the best man win. And that's almost like combat. I mean, we don't physically do that since we're not seven, but it really is like the battle of wills. And this, let's come up with a compromise. We don't understand that as well. And if someone wants to process and do that, is I've heard you, you've heard me. And that's a skill I think you have to learn with each individual woman. Sometimes guys just detach from that. The goal is to actually step toward her, like we said, and sit with her. And even if it's just clunky for a while, clunky is better than ignoring. And ignoring stuff for yourself works when you're single, kind of for a little bit. Doesn't work with a woman. They don't like that. And then for some men, there's going to be probably disrespect is the main thing men would say. And when I talk with women, that some of the ones, I mean, they'll laugh, but they'll roll their eyes. They're like, I'm not disrespectful. I say, I don't think you are disrespectful as far as your intention. But the stuff you might do, like tell him to do something, or what we call talk over him, at least the way women talk, I see is talk like this. And for men, that would just be like a fighting thing. Like if you talked over me, we jumped in together. That's just so foreign to us. So I just stopped talking. Okay, obviously you want to talk. No, 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 we're talking together. So some of it's that just takes a little bit of time, and for men to realize, sweetie, I was right in the middle of a sentence, and oh, I didn't. A lot of times women don't know that they just, I was just participating. So some of it's that, but I've got one person that she's just newly married and she's having to learn this, and he's in the army. So his way of dealing stuff is just go detach, fix it in his head. And part of her, since she's better at this, I think mainly because she's a woman, is when they had a disagreement, she goes and she can tell and she says, this is what I noticed. No, no, it's fine. She said, no, no. She goes, this is how we do it. And she's been, she's the heart. She said, this is how we do a relationship. I'm going to bring it up if I don't know. And she's modeling for him because most men don't know how to do this. Of that, when in doubt, we're just going to look at each other and talk. Maybe we don't fix it, but I'm not just going to stick my head in the sand. That would drive me crazy. And that's a little unnerving for her, but her husband loves it. He doesn't like it at first, but he loves the end result because he knows, oh, I don't have to worry about her walking around resenting me. Nope. No, if it bothers her, she's going to bring it up.
That's powerful because I do feel like women, because of some of their conditioning, everyone's different, but we are in many ways trained to be, the nice girl, to not make waves, to not complain. And there's a productive way, as you're saying, there's a productive way to bring these things up. But a lot of times we let them fester and we let them build and then we blow. And the man is looking at you like, I didn't even know we had a problem. And
Mm-hmm.
now we're at level 13 out of 10. So that's really powerful to be able to bring those things up. And I was curious about that actually. How can women ask for what they need? How can you coach them to really be able to women have needs and desires that they will stuff down, but then they're upset because they think their partner should know this.
And see, I think that goes back to, I think one of your themes with the emotions is while it helps us from a healthy standpoint, it also helps men. So as a man, once I can hear or sense a woman's emotion, that connects me with you. I may not want to be, but I'm going to feel that my guard starts to lower once there's emotion. If it's just a logical thing, oh, now we're just problem solving. If it's problem solving, well, here's my ideas better, and I can see your point, and we're not really connecting. I'm not really meeting your needs as much as I'm just turning it into a task. So I'd like her to start with some emotion, just some general idea. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling scared. I'm just feeling agitated, something over here. And now, again, let's don't do this when he's in the middle of the football game or like he's like hyper focused on something. But if you do that, then tell him what's going on because first, that generally makes men less defensive or like problem solving mode. Just like if a man sees a woman that's hurt or scared, again, in general, it's what can I do to fix it? Or what can I do to help? Versus she's just going to tough it out herself. So whatever she's feeling, doesn't have to be perfect. Just share that initially and then be specific, not necessarily with what he has to do, but what does she need short term? Is it for him to listen to her? Is it, can you sit next to me? I've done this with couples before. And the wife, I still remember one, and if she was crying and I said, what do you need? And you know the answer. I don't know. She didn't know what she needed. I said, what gesture can he give you now? You want him to hold your hand? You want him to sit next to you? And he's sitting there because I know he's thinking like, I don't know what to do. And she said, he can hold my hand. And just I glanced over him. He's like, I can do that. And then so now he has an idea. And now that he's doing what he's heard, like sit here. Now we'll work on the problem. Now we'll but for him, it's, I need something to be your hero, something. And it's going to change with what she needs. And it may not feel great, didn't feel great for her, but it did feel great to have him sit there with her. And so we don't want to leave it up to chance for him to guess correctly. That works awful with men.
Oh,
Awful.
I love this communication though. Seems like so much of this underlying is the communication between two people. And I can't get off of the respect thing. I have to come back to that for a second because something crosses my mind that I feel disrespectful when I say things like, take this turn. Oh, you're driving
Mm.
too fast. You're tailgating. Use this knife instead to cut that onion. Being helpful. Constantly having a better way of doing things. How do you feel about that when to me, again, this is a Kim thing. I feel like I'm being disrespectful because he's a grown adult who knows how to do things. And sometimes I act like he would want to get in a car accident. No, it's a reaction on my part, obviously, that I have to do. That's a past thing. But I would love to know your thoughts on that.
Well, you said the word that I was going to use, which is most women I talk with, they say I'm just being helpful. And I think there's a part of them that they are being helpful. So I don't think they're just making that up. But it's a way of, especially when I'm comfortable, my way may be a better way. My way may be more efficient. But if I'm doing that, the message it sends is that you're doing it wrong. I don't think that's the intention, and here's the right way to do it. And going back, it's funny, going back to that client, she was telling me that sometimes her husband, when he eats, he's loud when he eats. He's a heavy chewer, stuff that things you only notice once you're married, stuff that you didn't think would notice. And she said normally that irritates her, but this day he was driving the car. They were going someplace, and the weather wasn't good. And she says, I didn't feel the need to tell him to do stuff because I felt taken care of. Even his chewing didn't bother me. But that started from I don't need to tell him what to do. I don't need to help him because in general, and men understand this with each other, we don't like for someone to give us advice. It doesn't mean we don't need it at times, but in general, we don't like, because we like to solve problems ourselves. That's one of the ways we build our self-esteem. And so even though you could do it, and I tell wives this when he's struggling, I'm like, don't feel sorry for him. Be gracious. His mom died, put your arm around him, but don't help him because he needs that for himself. And as he does that, that's going to help you to trust he'll figure it out. He'll get this. He's over here. We want to make it where he asks because as you do that in times, a man will start to ask, how do you see this? Well, I need to bounce this off of you because that the real fantasy for a man is I have someone that's my best friend I can bounce an idea off of, but I'm not there yet that I'm ready for an answer. I just need to hear it and see her reaction and see what she does. I mean, I think that's what women tell me also, but men have that need also. But what you're saying will lead to what I just described, is you're more aware of it.
That's great. And I think what you said about when you can recognize that you feel safe, and I think it's really important for the man to understand that they are creating that safety also and be trusted with that, the trust factor. And we did not even get into that, but that's a whole nother, I think, episode on trust and fidelity and all of that. What I'd love for you to do, because this has been absolutely amazing. It's been so good to be able to see both sides of the equation, and how men think and how women think, and just some really good solutions. But even if you've mentioned it before, I would love for you to give someone who's right now really just trying to work on their relationship, what are three things that they can be thinking about as they're working through this relationship right now? What are things that they can actually take action on?
So I think the first one is going back to yourself, as in, what am I doing to contribute to this? It's not a blame thing. Am I avoiding something? Am I, over relying on family? Am I, like I said, are you doing like what I do and do videos too much? Or am I hiding some way? And the second is, what is it I would like to see different? I may have to think about that some. Is it I want him to treat me nicer? Okay, well, what does that mean? And we're looking for just gestures initially, just something that the other person can give us. And that's not a demand. That's actually a way, if it's me that's upset, I'm wanting to connect with him, but I probably need to see certain things. Maybe I'm a touch person. Maybe it just mean the world to me if he just listened to me, even if we tried this before. But can I identify what it is I would like? And the third one is make a decision to I'm going to try something different this week in regards to this. So I'm going to reach, even though I've reached out before, I'm going to reach out to him, or maybe I'll reach out to someone for help, or maybe I'll ask someone close to me, what do you think my part is? Just something so that we alter this pattern of just hoping and hoping it gets better. Because, like we had said, I've seen folks do this for years and then start using coping things, unhealthy coping things. So if they'll do those three things, they will notice a difference. Now, it may stir stuff up, but it will break up the pattern that you're in right now.
I like that. Finding out what how you're avoiding, how you're coping, finding a way to connect, which is great. Even and knowing what you want to connect, just being close to someone, and then making that decision to try something new to break the pattern. Those are really great tips to get started. But someone might need you even more than that. So how can people find you?
Sure, if you go to relationshipheadquarters.com, our main website, on there we've got a free gift. if you like what men find irresistible, we spend a fair amount of time doing that so that it would be fun when someone got. And there's also a 15-minute strategy session just to see if I can help in some way. And if it's something quick, we'll give you a quick answer. If it's something more in depth, we'll talk about that. But really, it's tailor made for you and what's going to be best for you.
That's I love that. What is your Instagram handle?
It is relationship underscore headquarters.
And I'm going to put all this in the show notes. So reach out to Bob, reach out to me, let me know what you think. When you hear this episode, what are your questions? There's got to be more that you want to know. And we appreciate you being here. Make sure that you download the episode and let us know what you think. And Bob, I can't thank you enough for being here today. You are so compassionate. You have such great advice, and it sounds like you really listen to what these women are needing. So I appreciate you sharing that today.
Thanks for having me, Kim. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Listeners, please make sure you nourish your entire life and give yourself grace today.